Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum to all viewers. I'm here again with Jewish scholar David, and I'm very happy to get an opportunity to talk post-debate about some of the issues that came up in the debate that we had a couple of nights ago. If you haven't watched that debate, definitely go back and watch it. A lot of people found it very informative. They enjoyed it. And they learned a lot. They learned a lot about Judaism. They learned a lot about David's perspective. And a lot of people found it very refreshing. They thought it was a very refreshing debate, respectful. I enjoyed it myself. And I really respect David for being forthright and speaking his mind. So my audience really appreciated it. I thought I'd have you back to expand, on topics that we didn't really get to talk about on the debate. So thank you for joining.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
So the first thing that I want to touch on, as you know, many of my audience might know already, there was this hit piece by the ADL that was published pretty much right before, I think, or a few hours before our debate. And I didn't realize that it had been published. And was joking with you because you had said we should have more conversations at the end of our debate. And I joked that, oh, well, we'll see if my channel is still around after the debate. And then, I saw, oh, there's actually this hit piece from the ADL. And for those who don't know what the ADL is, the Anti-Defamation League, it's a very powerful group. They're able to, have a seat at the White House if they want. They're able to, meet with all the major tech companies and dictate to them a lot of policy decisions regarding what they claim to be hate. And so if they categorize someone as a hate preacher or extremist or whatever, radical, then that unfortunately carries a lot of weight with political institutions, tech companies, social media companies in the United States and probably around the world as well. So it's a serious thing for them to call me out. But I was surprised. I never expected that. I never expected that they would pay attention to me. Like they have been paying a lot of attention to Elon Musk, one of the richest people in the world, and characterizing him as facilitating hate speech when he bought Twitter. And kind of loosened up the terms of service or the community guidelines. So the ADL has really focused on Elon Musk and his advertisers, Twitter advertisers. So to go from that, to targeting me and having a dedicated article just talking about how I am an quote unquote anti-Semite, that's shocking and very surprising. And we can talk about the reasons why I think that is. But what I want to talk to you about, David, is just this idea of anti-Semitism. Like, how do you define it? And there was a discussion with Candace Owens. There's a rabbi that she discussed with. The interview went viral. And one part of it, the Rabbi Barkley, says that, well, anti-Semitism is something that is a unique hatred. It is unique type of hatred. And there's no hatred greater than anti-Semitism. It trumps, basically other types of hatred. And so then Candace continued to ask him, well, can you define it for me? And he said, well, it depends. Like it's an evolving thing. It's an evolving definition. And I can't, give you a one size fit all definition, basically. He evaded the question, basically. So I was wondering, what is your perspective on that? What is your perspective on anti-Semitism? Obviously, it is something real that exists, and it's something that anyone can fall into. Muslims can fall into, to hate the Jewish race simply because someone is a Jew, to hate them. That's my definition as a kind of racism. And Islam is against racism, whether it's against Black, white, Asian, or Jew. So can you give us your definition? Does your definition correspond, or is there a difference?
No, I don't use the word anti-Semitism. I think the whole concept is an inaccuracy. And like I said at the beginning of the debate, my first slide is Judaism what Jews do or what the sages teach. And besides for loving Judaism, having studied it my whole life, I also love metaphysics and philosophy of mind, and I think it's also a fallacy from even a secular scientific psychological point of view of philosophy of mind. Um, but I'm happy to just a precursor to say there's what Jews do, Jewish organizational, Jewish group strategy that may or may not correspond with the religion. So, like I have met actually Abe Boxman when he came to Detroit. I met Jonathan Greenblatt. I know almost all the local representatives of the ADL. They're actually mostly women, volunteer attorneys, kind of keyboard warriors. Um, so, I mean, if you want to look, what angle to look at it, to like what motivates the ADL, and then also maybe to clarify some misconceptions of how Jewish organizational life works, how Jewish power uh, influence lobbying works, and where the ADL fits in greater Jewish organization. And mention the ADL is not a religious organization. Religious people have their own view, and like I said in the debate, I don't think people are one dimensional. And to say anti-Semitism, and I would say why I chose to speak out. Generally Jews, maybe historically since the beginning of times, but certainly in the U.S., organizational Jewry likes to go through a unified voice. So most Jews will look at me as doing a disservice because we have organizations, we have leadership, and kind of fall in line. And as a minority, we're more powerful when we speak through a unified voice. So if I'm coming giving a dissenting view, and the reason I've chosen to be a dissenter, not just maybe leaning anti-Zionism, but because I think that general Jewish strategy is a mistake, most specifically through this concept of anti-Semitism and, God forbid, trying to ruin the life of perceived opponents. And in my perception, that these organizations that fight anti-Semitism actually cause more anti-Semitism and are a radicalizing factor, and they ruin the ability of to say, okay, well, let's say you had a conflict with an individual Jew, or God forbid, there's a war going on in Israel, and to make it collectively to where, I mean, probably not you're a God-fearing man, you probably wouldn't fall into it, but I've spoken to a lot of other people that aren't God-fearing people that fall into anti-Semitism because they see that like the Jews are out to get them, and they don't know where to turn because these organizations, or say, even just random Jews, they're going to do a hit piece on you, and some random Jew that doesn't really know any better is going to read it, and they're going to say, "Oh man, I got to try to ruin your life in order to save the Jewish people." So I've always opposed the concept of anti-Semitism. I think it's false, as said, from a theological view, from a philosophy of mind. There is no one-dimensional people like that, and it just escalates hate. I mean, if someone was a violent threat or something like legitimate threat where the community should be aware, like there's this person out there and they're dangerous, or something like that, informative matter, I might say that that's more reasonable.
Yeah, I watched your conversation with a prominent Zionist. His
Joseph
title
Cum.
is Joseph. Yeah, Israel advocacy. So, and he asked you the same question. He basically was asking, well, David, you have a different approach for how to address Judaism and Jewish community, and presenting that to a variety of different people, including some people that he considered anti-Semites. And you said that, well, my approach seems to work. It seems to be being very forward and transparent and honest in engagement and forthright seems to have a positive effect. And I definitely see that in even the comments right now. A lot of people are complimenting you, and these are people who are, a lot of Muslims are very traumatized these past 6 months. Like, we're very traumatized and dealing with a lot of psychological stress because of the war that's going on, and the images that we're seeing. But we don't want that to translate into just hatred for one race. And then when they see you and you're a practicing religious Jew, and you're coming and you oppose war, and you are able to talk about Jewish beliefs very openly, and they're your beliefs, right? They're your beliefs, and you are going to stick by them even if someone disagrees. But just the fact that you're willing to have that conversation in an open and respectful way, That's very unique. Why do you think that is?
Um, well, let's place that there's accepted Jewish group strategy, and organizational Jewry has developed this strategy, and we have strong networks and precedents and leadership and charity and pressuring and shaming to basically go along with the accepted strategy, and so somewhat there's punishments for going against the strategy. I get a lot of pushback from my fellow Jews, and there's reasons that are beneficial for the community to use this strategy of so to say the unified voice. And God forbid there's corruption, so to say, within the organized Jewish community, and you're looking, well, um, not just the war in Gaza or Zionism, where I think it's gone over the top. Even President Biden, it's completely out of control. But even decades ago, when maybe it wasn't that bad, and we're just talking about the strategy of the ADL or various organizations. I also mentioned that I was Hasidic and Hasidic Brooklyn and Orthodox schools. There's an alternative network between organized um, non-Orthodox Jewry and Hasidic Jewry, and those organizations also have an alternative approach. And you also, like I said, in the debate, we were arguing a lot about belief and saying judging people by action, and saying, well, let's say, let's say maybe a person does have hatred in their heart. They do have these horrible views of hatred, racism, anti-Semitism, uh, but still, you judge a person by action. And like I was a Hasidic Jew in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's a tough place, and people aren't politically correct. A lot of people don't even have a high school education, and I was in the construction business, and I guess I employed a lot of anti-Semites. Relatively, and people that weren't careful with their words and said horrible things. Um, but that was relatively common in the streets of Brooklyn, and judge people based on their track record. Like, do they come in time? Do they steal? Are they honest? Do they do the job that they say? And then looking at that, well, would you rather work together with somebody that has these horrible, hateful opinions, but has a good track record of honesty in work, or relatively. I don't know if you appreciate what I'm saying, even in relation to what we were debating 2 nights ago.
Yeah, I get it. You're prioritizing in accordance with a kind of larger Jewish understanding, prioritizing the practice as opposed to what might be in the person's heart. So, what would you say is like the biggest example of anti-Semitism that you've experienced, whether in Brooklyn or Michigan or elsewhere?
I mean, verbally, I mean, when I was more active or in the streets of New York, or even Detroit, just verbally, constantly, people say, ridiculous, horrible things, conspiracy. Sometimes, people just call you Jew, or, specifically conspiracies about Jewish power, or misperceptions, but it doesn't necessarily have any correlation with the action. And sometimes, like in the business world, like you run with it. You think it's like um you think the guy from Patrick Ben David, Sosnick, or um some of the other Jewish personalities, like, yeah, we do run the media, or like, yeah, we do have this power, and like a method to get ahead in business. Like I was in construction management, and if people had misperceptions of the power of Jews, I just ran with it, let them think that, as long as they do their job, as long as it's good for business. Or even fundamentally, like a lot of Christians, or certain beliefs according to ADL, basically, like now, like 1 out of 5 Americans is like a rabid anti-Semite, according to the ADL survey. Maybe 5 years ago was 1 out of 10. And if you're thinking like Christians who maybe think like, okay, these guys are cursed, they did kill Christ, or something like that, and it's like, no, that's what I believe. Well, can you trust the person in business? And there's actually Jewish law like that. Some even among the Haredi, that favor, so to say, a religious anti-Semite to an atheist, in terms of like Maybe with halal, it's similar to like, can you trust someone to work with kosher food? And generally, the rabbis have ruled that the key thing is the person fears God, meaning that they're going to keep their word, that and they could be trusted that if nobody's looking, that they fear that God will punish them if they break their word. In terms of like being trusted with food, and that they're not going to sneak someone on kosher into the food because they gave their word, and they believe that God will punish them if they broke it. But the person could be a religious anti-Semite, relatively, just like, or even openly anti-Semite. But if they fear God, and so in Brooklyn, like, yeah, I worked constantly with anti-Semites, and like, I did building permits, and it was a, relatively somewhat a dangerous business, and I dealt constantly with anti-Semites. It was just kind of a regular, and it's like, okay, you got your opinion, we're probably not going to fight. There was rarely violence. Sometimes there was arguments, and we negotiated through it and say, like, okay, you can't change everybody's mind. And I don't know what kind of background you had, like, but if you've lived in an urban place, where the kind of verbal openness is racism, maybe you said went to public school, and I'm sure like relatively anti-Islam, Arab sentiment is much higher than anti-Semitism. So I'm sure you've dealt with relatively worse than I have.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of examples. With me personally, no one really has come in the street and said anything mean. I get dirty looks sometimes, just because of the way I'm dressed. But
I mean, like
nothing
Trump,
like,
they just give you a nickname. Like President Trump, just gives somebody a mean nickname and they stick with that. So like relatively, and I've went with that. Like I've been in certain scenarios where I kind of had an anti-Semitic nickname, and people called me that, and I just went with it because it was like business or school or bullying, and like what could you do? You just go with it.
oh wow, that's not good to just identify by that. That's really
Well, I
very
mean,
ugly.
you could call the ADL like like I went to public school for years, and like tattling, like the strategy, that also, like the rules of the playground, kind of like tattling. Um, in general, I've never been supportive, but like, okay, like, I mean, if you went to public school, maybe you were never bullied, or
I was
maybe,
bullied. I was definitely bullied. I was bullied, but not for specifically, oh, you're a Muslim and you're, you know, uh, maybe because when I was in school, I was just okay. This is just another white guy. Even though I would go and pray, we'd have prayer at the public school, but I wasn't like, it's not visibly okay. He's a Muslim. I'm also kind of taller, so maybe that's why they didn't like go that
I
route.
mean, if
But
you
I
could
definitely
imagine that you were
bullied for being a
getting,
nerd. I was bullied for being, getting good grades. That's what I was bullied for, but not necessarily. Even though I was in school when 9/11 happened, like I was in the ninth grade.
you
So
got a big audience watching. I'm sure maybe some people have
yeah,
dealt with this.
a lot of
Right,
people
right, so
have been.
but maybe you embrace it. Maybe bullies give you, anti-Islamic nickname, and you still are kind of like part of the team or the group. You want to be part of the group, and you accept it because, like, there's a few jerks part of the group, and they just call you some mean name, and you embrace it, and sometimes even for years, it could be like that. So, I would guess like most, especially Hasidic Jews in the business world. So there's insular people are protected, that you're not gonna. Um, and then some people, like, that's just how they treat people. So like relatively, you say like, okay, like, if you're on a team or around people that are not refined, haven't went through a process of character refinement, that's just how they treat people.
Right. So would how do you decide, like, in your personal interaction with people, okay, this person I know is an anti-Semite. This person I can really tell. Like, what is like the objective standard that you have in determining that this person is or isn't?
I don't believe in the phenomenon. Like, I'll deal with anybody as is. um and so, no, I don't think people are one dimensional. Like, people have hatred, and people have
Or how do you determine that? Like, this person has hatred.
um okay, well, okay, I went to public school in Metro Detroit. Like, I was in Brooklyn. It's like, okay, like, I'm a lot more worried about people being violent than being like mean or full of hate. So if you're looking like, okay, this person has hatred and they're violent, um, it's a much larger concern. And like, okay, I faced some bullying. Maybe some of the bullies were anti-Semitic. But I'm not actually sure, so I was more concerned with that. And then, sometimes you could negotiate your way through an adversarial relationship. I think it's a psychological misnomer that, like people might be racist. And, certainly I live in Metro Detroit, like anti-black racism is a much worse problem. And, like I live in a majority African American neighborhood, and so I constantly will hear people say racist things about blacks, and sometimes I'll push back on it, sometimes I'll just let it go, um, and then also sometimes, I mean, not really in the last few years, but when I lived in New York City, so you're around people that like the subways these days, where it's like, okay, this guy's going to explode and do something violent. So I mean, just this misnomer of psychological intentions. Saying, is there even such a phenomenon that this person just hates Jews or hates Muslims, hates Arabs, and even one dimensional. Where if you're put in, if you speak to the person like, okay, I'm a person, maybe some of your stereotypes about me have some truth to them, or inaccurate, and say relatively, like I had friends as a kid who were um, Christian anti-Semites, and they maintained, so to say, their Christian anti-Semitism. Um, their whole life. They probably still do today, in like a theological
But you're
anti-Semitism.
friends with them.
Well, I was friends, so, like, I'm saying, like, relatively that, they were like, just basic theological, like, okay, you guys are cursed, like, but maintain that because that was a religious doctrine, but we still developed some sort of friendship based on mutual interest, mutual experience. But if you thought about it, be like, yeah, you're still a Jew, and like these things are still true about your group, or maybe you're from the good ones, and or also, um, God forbid, you be in a situation where you accept mistreatment, and so maybe as a child, like whatever reason, um, I was in those situations where I accepted mistreatment. But even relatively, like I would still classify those people as my friends relatively.
Hmm. Well, you're just a very forgiving guy, I can tell.
But it's
Because
a
I don't know if
strategy.
I would be able to do that. If someone, is calling me, bad names, then I'm not going to be very friendly towards them. But you have to be kind of a big person to be able
Well,
to
maybe
overlook
you don't
that.
live in Brooklyn or Detroit, where just like, okay, you people, you know what you people are like, and where you still have some sort of relationship, and where people live in ethnic neighborhoods or stereotypes are. So I'm not, maybe you're just completely not used to that phenomenon.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like if someone is saying something out of jest or just out of a lightheartedness, oh, you Arabs, like just saying that, and I'm not Arab, I'm Persian, but just kind of more of a lighthearted type of prejudice. I don't know if you can say that, or lighthearted racism, then maybe, okay, we can joke around, you joke, I joke, and people get along. But yeah, if it was something more than that, like this is actual, this kind of animosity that they have, like you can tell, like when someone is just lighthearted versus when there's real hate behind what they say, then you distinguish and treat people differently on that basis. One other thing is that,
Can I make a parallel just to maybe
sure, sure.
express it? And this might, if because it's probably more likely and more common, especially in America, where you have people that are openly sexually degenerate.
Mm.
Suppose you were looking like, oh, like you went to Harvard, so like racism is the end all of bad behavior. You got to report them and have them ostracized, as where something like openly sexually degenerate behavior is normalized. But you think, okay, like, yeah, I've also had a lot of friends and dealings and business associates with people who were openly sexually degenerate, and like, I went to public school, and a lot of people, that's all they talk about for hours and hours. They just talk about sexually degenerate behavior. If you're like, no, I'm like, I don't approve of that. I don't want to be around that. But you have to navigate, the world carefully, and like the LGBT stuff you mentioned, might could also be important. You're saying like, okay, like I might agree with you relatively on that, but I've still had homosexual friends, or I don't discriminate against homosexual people. And I wouldn't have had the choice. Like I would have, went to public school or university or the workplace. So I mean, I'm not sure if you think that's a legitimate parallel to racism, and or if you agree with me that saying that racism is in Western society, especially higher academic level, not like the streets of Brooklyn or Detroit, is unacceptable as we're sexually degenerate behavior or talking is normalized.
Well, for me, it's like much easier to get along with Jewish people, with Jews, than opposed to like someone who's openly like in your face a degenerate. Then that is a little bit harder to deal with. But with Jews, like I know that they're religious, they believe in God, and that's something that sets them apart actually from people who don't believe in God. But it reminds me of like this idea of people getting along. It reminds me of my family is from Iran. So both of my parents are originally from Shiraz, but they tell me that in Shiraz of Iran, there's like historically a big Jewish population that live in Shiraz, and they lived, in their communities, but very close, very close to where Muslims were living. This is in the previous generations, and there was no problem. Like there was no like, even though it was very clear, like this is a distinct community. They have their own butcher, they have their own practices, they have their own holidays that they celebrate. Sometimes they'll bring food, because they're celebrating a particular holiday. They're eating Persian food, because but it's like kosher Persian food, for example, and they'll share it, things like that. And there was never like any issues or problems in that between the groups. Like it's just known that these are Muslims, these are Jews, they're living in the same area, and they can live, in this kind with this kind of tolerance. I think that's historically been the case in the Muslim world, including in Palestine. Like I think that's been the case. Like you had historically Jews that are living, or in Jerusalem itself, and Muslims, and it's understood like, okay, there are differences, and they have their religious beliefs. Muslims have their religious beliefs, and you get along, like you live, and there isn't this kind of animosity. I think that changes with Zionism or the state of Israel, but it's interesting how that translates to an American context where there's much more multiculturalism, and at the same time, not as many bonds between people on the basis of religion. Like in some places, like in New York, especially, yeah, you have communities, but you go to the subway and it's everyone. You can tell who believes what necessarily.
And there's also the nature of group conflict. I mean, especially for anti-Semitism, and as an individual, so you could deal with harsh people, and it's like, okay, I did construction management. I lived in New York. I picked up Hispanic workers off the street, and yeah, I wasn't going to pick into them like their belief system or whatever. They did the job, they got paid, even long term. Um, so if you haven't worked in a situation, or some like school or some, a lot of times you're unfortunately in a situation where you have no choice. Uh, but group conflict is real. Especially at some point, we'll talk about Israel, Palestine, and Gaza, and just be like, okay, our people on the other side of the planet are killing each other, or God forbid, like you're Iranian, and saying, well, we're at war. Relatively, our people, to some extent, like have been killing each other. Say, well, are we both loosely connected to that, or if it's an urban area where there's urban conflict, versus dealing with person as an individual and recognizing group conflict. And I've seen your debates for a few years. Actually, I watch modern day debate, and because I'm theistic, you've been arguing against atheists or against extreme liberalism. So I've usually taken your side in the debate, or thought, kind of like, yeah, you're making good arguments. Okay, you went to Harvard, good for you. You're a smart man. So I was kind of, pleased, learn from your arguments. And then, I think it's only since the war that you've been active in criticizing Judaism. You say, well, group conflict is real. If you're looking into it and you say, well, there is a phenomenon that there are groups, and the groups are in conflict, and you might end up on one side of it, and then how are you going to deal with that as an individual? And could you just forget about that, with an individual person you deal with, or you recognize that that individual, though they may be trustworthy as an individual, they're still part of a group and part of a larger conflict, and that could be related to cultural wars or actual wars, or politics. Like I lean conservative. I went to good schools, universities. You went to Harvard. At least presumably in many ways you lean conservative. So I'm sure you had to deal with this constantly.
Yeah, definitely. your observation that uh, since October, I've just been more focused on Judaism and this idea of group conflict. Well, the thing is that, I've debated pretty much every religion, whether it's been a formal debate or it's been a video. And it's just the environment that Muslims find themselves online. There's so many different parties and groups that are criticizing Islam constantly and portraying Islam as a religion of terror and hate and misogyny, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of like the background noise that Muslims just get used to. But if we're going to have these kinds of critiques of Islam, like on a principled basis, we should be able to critique other religions by a similar standard. Like you're saying that Islam mistreats women. Okay, well, let's look at the Christian texts. Let's look at the Jewish or the Hindu or the Buddhist texts, and what do they say about women, and compare. And then you can make a claim about Islam or whatever. That's the only exercise that I really engage in. It's okay, let's just open a book. let's read a book for once and see, okay, what do these other scriptures say on this particular topic? And is it fair for you as a Christian or you as a Jew or you as a Hindu to call Islam X, Y, or Z when something similar or quote unquote worse exists in your own book? So I did this exercise where on the issue of wife beating, they say that, oh, Islam promotes wife beating. What Islam promotes is like the authority of a husband in a marriage and gender roles and everything that entails. And no, a husband, it doesn't have the right to just beat his wife black and blue. Okay, but there are these statements in our books about the authority of a husband and what that entails. So then this polemic against Islam, that Islam is a religion of wife beating. Well, what do we know about this issue in Christianity? What did Martin Luther say about wife beating? A lot, actually. What did Confucius say? What did Maimonides say? What do we find in the New Testament, actually? What did Paul say? And you find all these kinds of statements that go much further. Even Buddhism. What does the Buddha say about women? And he compares them to snakes and rats and so forth. So when we look at that and we look at that history, well, we can have a kind of extreme liberal reaction, atheistic reaction and say, well, all of these people throughout history were deluded and were evil misogynists who didn't understand anything, and only us in the 0.00001% of human history have finally understood what it means to be a woman and what a true meaningful relationship is and what a happy marriage is. Or we can go with a more rational conclusion that, okay, well, maybe there's some kernel of value and good with gender roles and with having this idea of a husband as an authority in a family. And maybe there's a reason for that biologically. Maybe God has created us in a certain way. And so following that kind of argument, and some people who are theists, like, they'll oftentimes appreciate it. If they're polemicists against Islam, whether they're Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, or Hindu, or atheist, they'll hate it because they'll hate it, and it's like, no, you're just, and they'll go into this denial exercise of saying, well, no, in our texts, that's not really what it means, and they'll do these kinds of textual gymnastics or apologetics to get out of what the clear text is saying. So that's my experience, but it shouldn't be. Going back to this ADL case, their main claim that I'm an anti-Semite is that I quote Jewish scripture out of context. I quote Jewish scripture out of context. Therefore, this is what contributes to them labeling me an anti-Semite. But my point is that, first of all, the ADL, you're not an expert on religion. First of all, you don't claim to be an expert on the Talmud or the Tosefta or the Zohar or any of these religious scriptures. You don't claim to be Talmud or Torah following Jews in the first place. Second of all, I'm just reading these texts and understanding them according to my perspective, in the same way that many of other religions, including Jews, will read the Quran, read Hadith, and they will come to their conclusions, and they'll advertise that and say that, well, I read the Quran, it has this verse, and I think it's a hateful, misogynistic religion. And they will have a whole career based on bashing Islam on through their reading of Islamic scripture, but they're not considered a hateful bigot because of that. Whereas, so either we're all bigots. If you criticize or critique someone else's religion, you're a bigot. We're all bigots for that, or no one is. But it can't be. You can't have it both ways. That if you criticize Jewish texts, that makes you an anti-Semite. But others can criticize Islam and Islamic texts, and that's perfectly kosher.
Yeah, I mean, God forbid, and say the problems, maybe lack of fear of God, lack of scholarship. And you say you have Jewish organizations that are not necessarily scholars, don't fear God, and are taking a pragmatic approach, and they're doing things that works. And you could have reasonable arguments about Jewish paranoia, Jewish safety. We should be a protected minority, and what normally is allowed. You got to be more careful with the Jews, and but is that being abused? Is that being abused? God forbid, for Jewish power in America, in the sense where you have um, like the ADL, where or Jewish organizations that are dominated by very wealthy people and a connection to politics and lobbying, and that could be doing corrupt business practices at the expense of Jewish people, and God forbid, covering up for human rights abuses in Palestine, where it's not legitimately, saying like, okay, you're maybe what you're saying is true, but like you got to give the Jews a break. Like, we're a minority, and it could be dangerous, um, which is unfortunate. And then, unfortunate for me. That's why I've chosen to step up into the arena, because I'm worried about my own corrupt Jewish leaders. I'm worried about not just, like, as a humanitarian, like what's going on to the Palestinians, but that I'm complicit in it against my own will. So it's very difficult, and the nature of group conflict. People will do it because it works, even if it's dishonest. Especially if a person doesn't fear God. And like you said, scholarship, like the debate yesterday, all the quotes you said, I was familiar with most of them, and I've been doing this for a while, and you can argue, well, that's not the heart of Judaism. Like, yeah, it says that, but it says the opposite 20 more times than it says that one time. And then even like I don't think you did any of your own research. That was all known stuff that you probably compiled, and like almost all of your criticisms are actually the mainstream thought at like Bar-Ilan and Hebrew University, at least about like the polytheism or the origins, the change of Judaism. In not necessarily saying that these few quotes that you found that are problematic is essentially what Jews are, because most Jews, you got to give us the benefit of the doubt. We're benevolent, good people, and maybe we have some flaws or has some statements, but we're overwhelmingly the opposite. And Muslims are not given the same benefit of the doubt, so it's completely normalized to demand that you denounce your own your own texts and your own background and ancestors. Uh, you can't just say like, no, we're good, benevolent people, and yeah, these things might be problematic or these few texts, but that's the overwhelming message is the opposite. And it's like, well, why are Jews given the benefit of the doubt, but Muslims aren't?
Yeah. To clarify though my argument, I didn't argue, or maybe I just didn't express it well, that at the heart of Judaism is polytheism. That wasn't the argument. Or at the heart of Judaism is like a hatred for non-Jews. So I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's an accurate portrayal of Judaism. I think that monotheism is what is the dominant, that's the dominant core. Um,
But
and
you
and
didn't
the
come up with
law.
that yourself. Like
Yeah, but that's
that's
based
based
on
on
what
Israeli
experts
scholars from
say, and
Israeli
that's based on
universities.
researchers say. Exactly. My argument was simply that, well, there's also some polytheism mixed in, and that's a problem. But putting that debate aside, people can go watch it if they want to see what we discussed. But what's interesting about what you're saying and what I'm understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but you acknowledge, and this is, I think, rare to see, you're acknowledging that um, there can be hatred that comes from corruption, corrupt behavior of Jewish leaders, while at the same time, you acknowledge that there can be irrational hatred of Jewish people. And we touched a little bit on this in the debate regarding the hatred that came down from Mount Sinai when, according to the biblical narrative. But like, you're acknowledging both. Whereas sometimes there are some groups that will refuse to acknowledge that there can be any kind of like Jewish radicalism or Jewish extremism or Jewish terrorism, or that, okay, the anger that Palestinians have is not because they have some irrational hatred of Jews. And in fact, many of these Palestinian groups, including Hamas, will say that, well, we don't have any hatred for all Jews. We don't want to kill all Jews, despite what the propaganda and the Hasbara that the IDF in Israel puts out. Rather, we have very specific grievances based on the usurping of our rights, the persecution of our people, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one of the things that makes it so refreshing to speak with you, David, is that you're able to acknowledge that, and it's not threatening to you. Like, it's not threatening for you to say, yeah, just like for me, it's not threatening for me to say that there is a group of terrorists, ISIS, for example, they're Muslim. I don't takfir them. I don't say that they're not Muslim. They're Muslim, but they're committing atrocities. They're committing these terrible crimes, and it's condemnable. I can acknowledge that. As a Muslim, I can say that, and I can denounce them, as I've done many times, and that's not going to threaten me. But I feel that sometimes there are some Jews who will be hesitant to point out, like, how can you stand by some of the things that Israel is doing right now? Like, and you don't, obviously, but there are some who will just defend tooth and nail, whether they really believe that the Israeli state is sinless and they're not doing anything wrong to the Palestinian people right now, as 2 million of them are starving in Gaza and they're being bombed as we speak. Or, they don't really believe it, but they think pragmatically, well, if we say something, then our whole community, our Jewish community, is going to be under threat. I think the opposite. I think acknowledging it and denouncing it, that's going to be much better for perceptions of your community. And I think that's your whole strategy, right? That's your whole mindset.
Yeah, I love the Jewish people, and saying I have an alternative vision of what's best for the Jewish people that goes against mainstream leadership. And within the Haredi Hasidic community, it might be more balanced. And just make an important theological point. Well, I fear God, and my fear of God supersedes Trump's my fear of anti-Semitism, my fear of bullies, my fear of war, and even my fear of death. So, because atheism infects, God forbid, it infects Jews worse than most other people. They don't have fear of God, and like the famous book "Duties of the Heart" that was written in Arabic. If you neglect your power of God, God leaves you to the lesser power. So if you fear God, you don't really fear anything else. Like that. Like, I mean, you say, okay, these are rational threats, but God's the controller. It's a derivative of monotheism, the unity of God. And if you don't believe in the unity of God, you don't fear God, then all these lesser fears overtake you. And I don't know if you agree with that assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely agree with that. The main fear has to be the fear of God. And if you fear God, then no one can harm you. No one can, because God is your protector, if that's a sincere fear that you have. So that's I think that's definitely shared. One of the other things I want
Also,
to,
you fear doing the wrong action. And saying, so it's not just like, well, can I get away with this? And saying like, no, God will punish me. And even saying like, there's no way God is going to let, even like, I believe we're the chosen people and God has a special plan. There's no way God is going to let um, us get away with what we're doing to the Palestinians. Like, even if the world can't stop us, it's wrong. God will take the side of the Palestinians. And it's
is
somewhat
this
a
is this a
narrative battle. I mean,
sure?
because like from the perspective of Jewish organizations, are you familiar with Hazal Din?
No,
He's
no.
I think he's Arab, but he's like a communist friend with Jackson Hinkle. I heard his few debates. I mean, he's a strong anti-Zionist.
Oh, yeah. Haas, yeah, I know Haas.
Oh,
I know
so
of him. I haven't met him, but
either have I, but I heard his debate. And he mentioned like, um, Zionism is a fallacy. And like I went to Israel after I was 18. Like I live in, I'm Metro Detroit. Probably half of my, you know, in real life friends are Black African American. And, conceptually, as a kid, I realized this two state for two people was racist and, untenable. And like, there's really no reasonable explanation for why there shouldn't be one state solution, all people living together, um, relatively to, say, racial relations in urban areas like Detroit. And a lot of times people's view on like, suburbs, crime in urban areas parallels their views on Israel, Palestine. And there's a narrative, like, so I was saying Hazal Din, like Zionism's artificial, it necessitates external support from America, from the West, from other nations, and it will collapse immediately. I mean, say it's unsustainable, it will collapse at some point, no matter what. But it necessitates the support of America, and there's a larger narrative of, like America, we're the good guys because we saved the Jews World War II. Like the Nazis were the bad guy; they were trying to exterminate the Jews, and America, stood in and saved the Jews, defeated the Nazis, and supported Israel creating the state. And so there's a larger narrative of America being the good guys because America's on the side of the Jews. It also corresponds with certain interpretations of Christianity and supporting Israel. And so part of it is a narrative battle. Part of it is perception of people who haven't actually been aware of the facts, or just disbelief of that actually happening. They can't imagine that Jews are actually doing that. And and it's also, the problem of segregation, where it's easier to demonize people that you don't know. So, just one quick story. Like, I went to Israel after spending a semester at University of Michigan. University of Michigan's a hotbed for Palestinian activism. And I remember at the Jewish school, one of the gardeners was wearing a University of Michigan hat. And, for a second, I was like, "You went to University of Michigan?" He was like, "Yeah." And that was the last time I saw him. But like, I spent 3 years in Israel. I didn't meet a single Arab friend, and maybe a few business transactions or cab drivers. But it was basically apartheid. And say, well, I didn't know about the human rights abuses. I never saw that. So okay, there's a war, but I just didn't meet any Arabs. And if they did, it was protected through business transactions. And then I got to University of Michigan, Stony Brook, for and I started meeting Palestinians and hearing their stories. And I saw like we're in the wrong here. And just the living here in Metro Detroit among mostly African Americans, saying like two two states for two people. Like, how is it possible that I live among African Americans in Detroit? And saying, well, yeah, a lot of people, I debate alt-righters and also like white nationalists and various things also. And that's basically what they think here. We need two states for two people. So, yeah, I think that narrative is collapsing, and the Jewish organizations, why they're, attacking people like you, is because they need the narrative, because Israel will collapse, Zionism will collapse without the support of America. And it kind of necessitates this misinformation campaign. And, Jews that can't accept, like, we're complicit in these crimes, God forbid, and it's not good for us. It'll be better to bite the bullet and then to, God forbid, and when we could talk about the end of day scenarios, that, the possibility that Jewish organizations, Israel, will double down straight into Armageddon. I mean, even Iran, something like that, saying we got to stop this, or will we keep on doubling down till Armageddon?
I'm curious, this idea that we have to be careful, or what Israel is doing, the crimes against the Palestinians, will lead to punishment by God. God is going to favor the Palestinians, even though they're not Jewish.
Justice.
How justice, how common is this kind of view amongst, your community? Because even those who won't publicly say it like you will, are there a lot, or it's pretty much just you who has this kind of fear of God, and specifically like when it comes to Israeli crimes against Palestinians?
Well, it's unfortunate that it is pretty rare. And so Zionism among Orthodox Jews, Haredim, was pretty common. Like I came from Metro Detroit, and when I got to Israel, I was shocked that, like, I ended up in some top schools that the majority of my rabbis were anti-Zionist. However,
Hmm.
they were not Palestinian humanitarians. They were, mostly had different theological reasons for anti-Zionism that we could discuss. I did meet the Notori Karta rabbis like Rabbi David Yisrael Weiss or Rabbi Feldman. They appeared to be more um, humanitarians. And also in Jerusalem, there were, I had contact with what they call Yushalmis, which were people who were in Jerusalem going back to Ottoman control and lived uh, under Ottoman control and had positive memories, but but even before British rule. So already under British rule, relations between Jews and Arabs were falling apart. But the Jews who had been in Israel during Ottoman rule relatively had uh, positive relations. Like they like babysat each other's kids. They were neighborly. They were friendly, and so I had to see that in Jerusalem. But unfortunately, most religious anti-Zionists are not Palestinian humanitarians. You do have like American liberals, like a lot of Jewish Voice for Peace, if not Noun, younger people that yeah, I think it's basically knowing Palestinians. It's what happened to me when I went to university and like the dormitory, the person over was Palestinian and we became friendly and I started listening to their stories like, oh my God, we're wrong. But so younger people, with immigration, with multiculturalism, like if you're a boomer, you don't know any Palestinians. If you're a millennial, everyone knows a Palestinian, especially in urban areas and through proximity, through knowing emphasize, sympathize with their suffering. But unfortunately, no, it's pretty rare. My estimates were in Israel, less than 5%. I mean, the unfortunately the polling's clear. Less than 5% of Israelis were concerned with Palestinian suffering, and in America, I would estimate maybe like 10-20%, although among the younger generation of people that grew up integrated with Palestinians, Muslims, might be like 30, 40, 50%.
Right. Yeah, but what was interesting to me is that you said it's like on a religious basis, like fearing God's punishment. Whereas if someone like Noam Chomsky, Jewish intellectuals like Noam Chomsky or Norman Finkelstein or Glenn Greenwald, they won't necessarily say that okay, it's out of a liberal kind of humanitarian perspective. Even some of them I think are atheists, right? I don't think Noam Chomsky believes in God, but
Well, I
still
mean,
he'll
from religious law, I think there's more like the people who fear God and oppose Zionism that was like, okay, mistreating the Palestinians is bad, but having a secular state with like LGBT and all this other like blasphemy and driving on Sabbath and various things, because like in the Torah, like there's punishment for death for a whole bunch of things. So relatively in the anti-Zionist Haredi school, um, very few of them are Palestinian humanitarians. They're more worried about like Sabbath observant and LGBT, and they might fear God on that level. They might also look at like, okay, you can't mistreat the Palestinians, like that just goes against all moral principles. But you religiously, unfortunately, that's not the highest of the priorities among the anti-Zionist Haredi.
right. Okay, well, that's very good. Let's talk about what you were saying, doubling down into Armageddon. So, what does that look like? What does Armageddon look like, especially for those in our audience who are not familiar with Jewish eschatology? Eschatology, for those not who don't know it, comes from eschatos in Greek, which means like later or end. So, eschatology is study of the end times for different religions. So what is Jewish eschatology? What is Jewish Armageddon?
Oh, I mean, so first, kind of like the source material, because like there's a lot of statements. There's a lot of prophets. There's Daniel. There's Isaiah. Yechezkel, and all the prophets have various visions. There's some overall arching trends that are said over and over again, and then there's sages like Maimonides who codified a system of prediction, and like not just Maimonides, but most of the major uh, rabbis, the Lubavitch Rebbe in the last generation, or some of the leading rabbis in this generation. But from the biggest sages that tried to codify things or make commentary, um, all of them, free will is almost a universal concept among the sages. So in the Talmud itself has this, you know, the vision, all righteous people will stand shoulder to shoulder and worship with the same God. I mean, there's certain statements about, like slaves and the Jews will come up on top, but I would say there's much more statements about all righteous people standing shoulder to shoulder. The Jews will return to worship in Jerusalem in the third temple, reestablish the house of David. Um, Although Maimonides lays out that the first two important steps are universal recognition of God and world peace, and then also the Jews returning to the Mosaic law, returning to the land of Israel, and eventually rebuilding the temple, reestablishing the Davidic monarchy, and the priestly class, and the biblical tithe and farming system and sacrifices. In terms of predictions about the Great War, um, basically it's a purging effect, and saying it's based on individual free will. And I mentioned there's a lot of statements in um, our version, the version we have today of the Hebrew prophets and the sages, of this collective punishment that you basically, at the end of right now, we can't serve God properly. Even if a person was perfectly righteous, the world is just not in a condition that we have to suffer within the material realm. We have to work hard. We have to constantly be on guard against sinful behavior. Um, but there are people that say, really try hard and are somewhat eligible, should Messiah come, that they would be able to, basically move right into the utopian society. They've already worked through, done the character refinement. But the vast majority of humanity is not there. Maybe nobody's there. So there you have the concept of the Great War, which is basically a purging, saying like God at some point, the Zohar mentions 6,000 years, and right now it's like the year, like 5,780. So within the next 200 years, that Messiah, should definitely come by. But if we behave properly, it could be before. But the concept that God wants the righteous people to be able to live in harmony and serve God properly, and at some point, if humanity's not there, like Noah's flood, God will just purge all of humanity of the non-righteous people through a great war, for the messianic era to be able to come into being. And like how that comes about with there's Islamic versions of like called like Antichrist, or the synagogue of Satan, or the Judaic versions of the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Esau, kind of like Christianity versus Islam. And there's that also, God forbid, the statements in the Talmud or multiple prophets tend to say that the East and West, mostly Islam and Christianity, will wage war against each other. And as they're about to destroy each other, why are we fighting each other? Let's turn against the common enemy, Israel, and then the false Israel will be destroyed, and the true servants of God will miraculously emerge. And basically all the people that aren't ready to be part of the utopian society will be killed off. The righteous people that live properly will be saved, and then there'll be the resurrection of the dead, and all righteous people from all generations will serve God together, like in peace and harmony, the utopian vision. And I understand there's a lot of similarities because with the Islamic version also of that.
Yeah, in Islam, the understanding is that the Messiah, Jesus, will return to. Well, first of all, the major signs of the end of times becomes with what's called the Mahdi, Imam Mahdi, who is just a righteous leader. He's not a prophet, but he's just a righteous Muslim leader, and he leads the Muslims to victory in different geographic regions until there's the emergence of the Antichrist, and the Antichrist, or Dajjal as it's called. And the Dajjal is going to become dominant throughout the world. He'll be able to enter into every city except for Mecca and Medina. And then he'll basically beat the Muslims back all the way until the Muslims are trapped within the Masjid al-Aqsa. So the Masjid al-Aqsa will be under siege, and that's when the Messiah will come, at that to that location. Actually, he'll descend from in Damascus, but he'll eventually come to Masjid al-Aqsa, and that's where he will meet up with Imam Mahdi, and that's when there's a transition of power from that righteous leader, that righteous Imam, to the Messiah. And then the Messiah is going to defeat the Antichrist at a particular place, and then his rule will begin, and the righteous people will live as Muslims under the Messiah. And then there are other events that will happen after that, like the appearance of Gog and Magog, or Juj wa Ma'juj in Arabic, and other major signs. But that is the return of the Messiah, and he'll live a full life and then pass away. And that's pretty much at the end of human history.
I add another important theological component of it also related to sin and atonement. And, because great war in terms of purging humanity of the sins is not necessarily a sign of messianic times. It's just a sign of, God forbid, humanity has sinned so much that we need to be purged. So within the Levitical law, there's atonement and there's sacrifices, and the temple, certain forms of atonement. Small sins you could just repent. Like tonight before I go to sleep, I'll repent for all my sins. And small sins, like I'll wake up tomorrow and God will forgive me for. Judaism has the Yom Kippur. Certain sins can't be forgiven immediately, but you have to wait for Yom Kippur, and the day atones for. In the temple, there were certain sacrifices that could have been offered, that could have made an atonement. And then, God forbid, there's certain sins where the punishment is death. And there's even certain sins that death itself doesn't atone for. And you have things like transmigration of souls or hell. And so theologically, from the rabbinic perspective, we no longer have the death penalty. And God forbid, let's say if a person committed adultery, that's the punishment is death. And the body has been putrefied. There's no way to cleanse the body of that sin. Like a person could have maybe in totality have done enough good deeds that there's going to be righteous. They still might go to heaven, so to say, or God could judge them in totality. But certain sins have just putrefied the body so much that only death, the elimination of the body, will be able to get rid of that sin. And then, I guess, according to the sages, some sins are so bad that not even death atones for it. So God is slow to anger and allows people a long time to repent. But eventually, if humanity does not repent and sins become so bountiful, then there has to be a purge. And the purge is usually a great war. And from the theological, that God is just, evil and suffering is a tool that God uses that's actually a mercy, from the perspective, as a believer, God does not enjoy causing us to suffer or anything like that. The purpose of suffering is to allow atonement for sin. And so just that greater theological purpose, if we're heading towards doubling down into Armageddon catastrophe, we have our warning. We better repent now. And we have free will, and if everyone collectively gets together, what are we doing? We got to become better people and change. But if not, due to God's mercy and compassion, God will allow us to atone by suffering and death. And I'm not sure if Islam would have a straightforward similar theology in that manner.
There is the theology that God will punish a people who are rebellious, and he has done that,
Was
with
it punishment
Pharaoh.
or it's a kindness? I mean, saying that punishment is a kindness because it allows
Well,
atonement.
yeah, some people, that wicked people will be punished, but righteous people can be tested by what are called fitan, or the singular is fitna, which means a tribulation. So a tribulation will come. It could be war, it could be pestilence, it could be famine, it could be a natural disaster. But yeah, that is a type of purification, because if you die because of certain kinds of natural disasters, or like drowning, for example, or you were killed unjustly in a war, you're considered shaheed. You're considered a martyr, and when you're a martyr, then you go directly to paradise. So that is like a purification for you. That's But I had a question about hell. Like, what is the Jewish conception of hell?
Most of the sages don't believe that there's a hell. There's just purgatory and punishment. And um, so, I mean, God forbid. I mean, there's two perspectives to say that, like from the called like a Jewish supremacy view. Some of the sages, Kabbalists, say that only Jewish souls survive, and like so the goyim are like the dust and ashes of the earth, or like similar to animals. I mean, there are some Kabbalists and sages who say that, although a lot of them that like all people have the potential to be part of the resurrection, be part of a heaven. There is no eternal hell. There's just a purgatory process or reincarnation. Um, Unfortunately, like I would say, there's a misconception about messianic times because saying when Messiah comes, like let's say we try to be righteous and fear God and do everything right, and so if Messiah came in our generation and the messianic era entered, like okay, I have a lot of flaws, but that maybe I did well enough and worked on myself enough that I would merit to be from the righteous, who would get to just correct a few final things and be part of the utopian society. So if resurrection of the dead, when Abraham and the prophets are all resurrected, that I would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them in service of God. But other than that, you say like, no, I'm just gonna die. So like the Great War, there's the Great War of just the purging for punishment for sin, and then there's the final Great War where everybody but the people who are ready to stand in the utopian society will be purged. So unfortunately, like just looking at the scenario, like I don't think we're entering the final purge where because I don't look in this, we're talking like the sages, and I don't look really anybody in this generation that would appear to be ready to, be part of that utopian society. So it's just somewhat kind of like a favor to the righteous because there's so, like what about the good people that have no chance, like, President Trump or something? The system's rigged. It doesn't matter how you try, the system's rigged against you. And, the only way to, rebalance the system, all the leadership is corrupt and, whatever, that the only way to rebalance the system is a great purge and war. And you could be yelling and yelling and trying to convince people to repent. How well is it working? Okay, yeah, thank God you have a pretty big audience and you're talking about fear of God and righteousness, but like relatively to humanity, how well is that working? And God, so the God's eye view, what's God going to do? Is God going to allow us to purge ourselves, or is he going to keep on giving us more time to repent, even though we don't appear to be doing it?
Yeah, the idea with humanity getting worse and worse, and there's just like a decline, decay. That's an Islamic understanding as well. So that's the level of godlessness that we see in society is quite shocking, because it's like even outside of religion, it's just degeneracy and atheism and hedonism. So I think that's a very concerning thing for anyone who believes in God.
The sages debate, like compare Noah to Abraham and say, well, Noah was the most righteous man in his generation. Abraham, how would Noah compare to Abraham? And there's a question in the Talmud and the sages, and say Abraham was much more right. Noah didn't make that much of an attempt to change his wicked generation. So he was righteous enough that he was saved, but he didn't make really much of an attempt to change. But God ended up saving Noah and his family, and the rest of the generation was destroyed. As opposed to Abraham, maybe it was similar, but Abraham somehow was successful in changing enough of the generation that God did not need to bring a calamity. That one righteous person was not only able to save himself, but to save enough of humanity. In So if you're looking this generation now, Is it going to be a Noah type thing where just a handful of people, righteous enough to be saved, or can someone like Abraham arise that will, change the hearts of enough of humanity?
Yeah. In Islam, like Abraham and Noah are considered uh, among the greatest prophets. And with Noah, he preached to his people for 950 years, over 900 years of preaching basically to his people, but they were so obstinate, and God, gave them what they deserved. So, but Abraham's people as well, they tried to kill him. They launched him into a fire, and King Nebuchadnezzar tried to burn him alive, but then God saved him from that. So they're also wicked people, but this is history, the history of killing prophets and trying to disobey the prophets. It's a ongoing process.
Yeah, I mentioned the debate also, at least the Kabbalists, the Jewish sages, you just have this natural boom bust cycle. And um because and the nature of it is because God is slow to anger and gives people a long time to repent. But because of that, it causes these boom bust cycles where God is just giving us more and more time to repent. But at a certain point, where if the generation doesn't repent, and sin keeps on increasing, and God forbid I said that when COVID-19 hit, in saying that from a righteous point of view, all tragedy is a sign to repent, not necessarily like some people like to say the given sin or what it means, but like any form of suffering, like something bad happens to me, I get sick, or something, like I lose something, or things don't go my way. Any sign, just like repent, examine myself. What is God trying to say to me? It's a natural logical derivation of monotheism. Everything, including anti-Semitism, that everything is a message from God, especially when bad things happen. And so first we had COVID-19 that hit, and maybe millions of people died, and it kind of cheapened the value of life because millions of people died kind of for nothing, just some disease. And it changed the risk reward calculation, where normally people are like, "Oh, I want to plan for a long life, but here's this horrible disease where one out of 100 people died for nothing." And but we didn't learn the lesson. Even like President Trump mentioned like the social distancing, like I hope we keep that afterwards, or certain respects that maybe the suffering of COVID-19 would have caused people to become better people. But and you think like the stadiums, like okay, like the degenerate behavior that happens in Western culture, the stadiums and entertainment. And once the pandemic went away, we just opened up the stadiums and right back to the same degenerate behavior. And now you have the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, and saying like, well, um, maybe a few righteous people, saying like, take it seriously, try to become better people, try to live the, like from the Christian terminology would be, eventually the kingdom of, heaven will be the kingdom on earth. Try to live like the kingdom of heaven, even though we're in this fallen state. But I'm sure you agree with the assessment that like COVID-19 was kind of like a warning from God that it appears we missed, and then the war in Ukraine, and the war in Gaza, and we could be hitting this purge cycle, God forbid.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that these kinds of global disasters are a reminder of our own mortality, and time is running out to return to God. So I want to ask some questions, like one or two questions remaining, and then I want to get questions from the audience, if that's okay with you.
Are you sure?
Okay. And so if you're in the live chat, you can feel free to put your question. Maybe we'll start off with a question from the audience, and then I'll ask one other question. Oh. Any questions for David? Yeah, there's over 1,000 viewers, so Okay. Well, this is a question that I had as well. So the red heifer issue, um, they're preparing for sacrificing these red heifers. Can you just elaborate more on that? Is that something that you believe yourself, or is it something that is just a particular group that believes in that?
No, it's a biblical commandment, and it's only related to the priest and temple service. So in uh, the Levitical law, there's a certain impurity that comes from being in touch with a dead person, and that causes a state of ritual impurity. And so, presumably, all people are part of. There's also like menstrual blood taboo that you come in touch with a woman during menstruation is also a form of ritual impurity. But the key point of the red heifer in the Messianic times is so the laws of Leviticus lays out this procedure for purifying a person from contamination by a dead person, and that involves the perfectly red cow being burnt and the ashes being spread on the person, and maybe also going to a ritual bath and waiting till nightfall, and then the person has been freed of the ritual impurity of touching a dead person. So to most people, it doesn't matter that we're in a state of ritual impurity. It only matters to serving in the temple, and only the Kohanim, the priests, are allowed to serve in the temple. So the point of the red heifer, like the temple will be rebuilt. However, even if the temple were rebuilt and there were priests, they can't serve in the temple. They can't touch the temple vessels until they've been purified, and they can only be purified in with this red heifer. And so in biblical times, like you mentioned, the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, there are like 24 families of Kohanim, of priests, and they each served two weeks a year in the temple. And before they did their temple service, they went to these special places where they had to go through ritual purity before they went to the temple. And some people think that Qumran was a place of the priest where they went to purify themselves before doing temple service, and one of that would require this red heifer sacrifice, and that's just what they call uh, there's hukim and mishpatim. There's laws that make sense logically, that could be derived logically, and then there's laws that can't be derived by logic, and you just have to accept that God commanded it. So this is one of the laws of that is beyond rationality. But so the reason it's connected to Messianic times, because it's not really applicable. It doesn't matter if you're in a state of ritual impurity. And I'm not sure if Islam it's like that. God forbid, like a person has a seminal emission, causes like a state of ritual impurity, and then you shouldn't like touch a Torah scroll or lead prayer services. So maybe in Islam there's also something like that. So you have like a seminal mission, you can't lead prayer services, or you shouldn't like touch a sacred object until the person's bathed or waited till the next sundown. So this ritual impurity of touching a dead body only refers to the priest and their service in the temple. So that's why it's related to Messianic times.
Okay, that's a good, thorough answer. Thank you. Let's see. There's a comment.
Is there a similar ritual impurity in Islam?
Yeah. Well, not for. Yeah, there's ritual impurity. Um, what is for handling a dead body? Like, is there ghusl that's required? I haven't studied the fiqh exactly of handling, because you wash the dead before burying them. But the
And it
person
can be
washing,
conveyed from person to person. So the priest have to be very careful. It's not just the person who touched the dead body, but the person who touched the dead body could convey that impurity by touching another person or touching a utensil that another person touches.
it doesn't transfer like that.
I mean, is there a practicality different? And I mentioned the difference, like a seminal emission, like, God forbid, if you're supposed to lead prayer service, even if it's an involuntary nocturnal emission, it's like, oh, I can't lead prayer services tomorrow. I had an involuntary nocturnal emission, and you got to wait a day or something like that.
Well,
Or,
you
or,
have to
or
pray.
menstrual blood, where it's like you can't be the emissary of the community in certain functions when you're in a state of impurity. I don't know if there's similar things in Islam like that.
Yeah. With seminal emission, you'll have to pray. So you'll have to take the ritual bath before the next prayer, like prayer time ends. So like at night, you wake up for your prayer for the morning Fajr prayer. If there was a night emission, then you have to bathe before you can pray. Other things that you can't do, you can't, for example, touch a mushaf, like touch a copy of the Quran when you're in that kind of state of janaba, like major ritual impurity. But when it comes to washing the dead, some, I think, scholars, they said that it is required, that you have to make ghusl, you have to have a ritual wash. But the ritual wash is not, it just means water has to touch every part of your body, and your hair, your lips, your ears, behind your ears, every part of your body has to be touched by water. That's like you just take a shower basically, and then you're pure. So yeah, but
The
it's
Talmud goes into extensive detail about the operation of the temple and the priests. So, like ritual impurity is, from a modern perspective, it's just ridiculous. But from a religious perspective, it's it's a substantial thing. And so things like the red heifer, like, so Christians or uneducated Jews, like, oh, there's a red heifer, it's a sign of Messiah. Like we're because theoretically, like, should the temple be built, uh you need a priest to be ritually pure to even do it. So that's the connection to messianic prophecy. There might be a verse or two related to kind of like it's a sign of messianic times. But a lot of actually one of the benefits of Hinduism is concern of ritual purity, and takes a spiritually minded person to be careful with ritual purity. Like we mentioned, like purity of mind, but purity of body, what they touch, what they do with their body.
Here's a joke question. I hope you aren't offended, but people have been saying that you resemble Ted Cruz. Have you
I
heard
get
that
that a lot.
before?
Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe Ted Cruz is a God-fearing man, or certain.
I doubt it.
I mean, he probably has to be to some extent. I mean, he might be a deeply flawed person in many ways, but yeah, but I do get that a lot. Like, like, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned Hinduism. Someone's asking if you have studied Islam, like formally, like in college. You mentioned, I think, having Muslim friends or Palestinian friends in college, but did you actually take any classes?
I never formally took a class. I studied, starting in my mid-20s. When I was in Stony Brook, I had Muslim friends, and they encouraged me to read the Quran and other books. And then I started doing interfaith. I have on my channel like a series I did called Tour of My Library, and I have about 50 books on Islam. I've read the Quran multiple times, different translations. I've actually prayed with Muslims. I had, like, Ahmadiyya has very nice, like, transliteration prayer book, like introductory prayer book that has the Arabic, English, and a transliteration, and says, like, when to bow, or what to do, and even has like pictures. Um, and I have and people could check out my channel. I have a episode where I go over my Islamic books. But I probably read about 50 books on Islam starting in my late 20s. And in university, I had a good friend who was a Saeed, a Pakistani Saeed, and we became good friends and discussed and the dormitory. And throughout my life, at different periods of time, I've had Muslim friends, and I'm academic in general. So relatively, I'm Hinduism is a big interest of mine, especially the Hindu theology, karmatic system, psychology of the soul.
Okay. Let's
And
see.
it's also really that unfortunately, God forbid, I had too much pushback from doing interfaith with Muslims. That I mean, interfaith for a while, and people were very skeptical and scared of me going into mosques and meeting with Muslims. They're scared, like, paranoia, like like, oh my God, like they're going to come, they're going to come kill us, and so there's just this extreme level of paranoia in the Jewish community, and it became like I probably lost half of my um, half of my God forbid, like Jewish friends from going to events with Palestinians or interfaith with Muslim. There's a related to Israel, and there's a huge amount of paranoia.
Yeah, I think there is interfaith is problematic. Like as a Muslim, I tell my audience that interfaith is problematic in the sense that if it's like a liberal interfaith, the idea that like because this ecumenicalism or this idea that well, it's all religions are basically the same. As long as you're a good person, it doesn't really matter what you believe. That's contrary to Islam. That's contrary to Islamic theology. So if you go into a setting like that and it's just, oh, we're all pretty much the same, we all pretty much have the same beliefs, and we all believe in like just accepting whatever, then that's kind of a liberalized universalism that it ends up eroding religious belief, like, or the belief that no, it's important to have like a certain set of beliefs. So that in that sense, but I think talking about religion and having this kind of dialogue where, okay, we are actually communicating on the level of opposing atheism. We want to oppose this kind of secularist worldview. We want to oppose like degeneracy, as you had mentioned earlier. Like that is, I think, a much more fruitful and theologically sound basis for conversation. Obviously, the ultimate purpose of that is to invite people to Islam. Like that's what Muslims do. Like we want, and that's what I've done in our debate. And today I invite you to Islam. But yeah, that's the interfaith perspective.
I agree. I use the term broadly, and there's different levels of like the liberal, um, which comes along with democratic politics, and a lot of times, like mentioned the email, that Muslims are forced into because the Republicans are very anti-immigration. That when there was the Trump got elected, there was the Islam ban, and there was a lot of protests, and people were actually getting deported. And so you need like liberal coalition to possibly fight something, and then you might end up, okay, you got to team up with the LGBT or pro-abortion people. So even someone like Abdul Saeed here, and if you're familiar with him,
Yeah.
he ran for governor of Michigan, ended up being pro-abortion and LGBT, even though he's Muslim, because that's a necessity of politics. They're saying, okay, we're gonna give you something on the immigration issue, and you got to give us something on this issue. But I mean, there's also we call this interfaith, but like so in Metro Detroit, there's the Islamic Unity Center, which is in a wealthy area, and it has all different types of Muslims together and a lot of converts. And it's in a wealthy neighborhood. A lot of people are professionals and educated, and a lot of converts, and they have open houses. So not, they also sometimes have like interfaiths, but where just like you have a whole bunch of people from different traditions that say a prayer or briefly present, this is what we believe, as opposed to open house where you invite people into your mosque and give a presentation about what Islam stands for, maybe have like a beginner service. Because like if you ever been to a mosque, it's like I don't know how, like everyone has this stuff memorized, and it's like what are they doing, what are they chanting, when are they bowing. So to have some sort of like introductory service, like now it's Ramadan, there's all type of iftar events, but yeah, unfortunately most of it gets corrupted by the democratic machine, and a lot of it becomes intimidation. It's like, well, they don't really like you here, they don't want you in this country. So like if you don't you don't accept LGBT, you don't accept abortion, they're probably going to kick you out of the country. And so you get kind of forced into this liberalization of democratic politics. And there might be some element to it. You have to acquire politics in order. You have to enter politics. And in a democracy, the only way to obtain power is through winning in elections. And in order to win an election, you need you need a majority. So I mean, Rashida Tlaib is actually my congresswoman, who is relatively liberalized as opposed to in Dearborn, or like in Highland Park. I'm saying the wrong name, but there's an area in Detroit where there's enough Yemenis where they won the whole city council, and they started doing like anti-LGBT stuff there, and it's been like national media attention. But like Rashida Tlaib, there was a plurality. She won an election where Arabs, Muslims, Arabs maybe make up 30% of the electorate, Muslims even less, and so she needs a plurality of people to win. So I mean that's just the nature of democratic processes, and I'm not sure, if you take a practical approach in London also, there's a lot of criticism, even LGBT stuff or something like that, where the ADL's hitting you there.
Yeah, they did include that in the hit because I really oppose these supposed Muslims who just sacrifice every belief that they have for the sake of, getting the Democratic nomination and getting that kind of support. So I actually oppose that kind of politics and have been speaking out against it for quite a long time.
Well, were
But
you opposed to Abdul? I mean, if you're in
Abdul
Michigan,
Said too,
Abdul
yeah,
Saeed.
he's the same, cut from the same cloth, unfortunately. Like going full out and supporting abortion, like that's not a Muslim position. Like that's not Islamic. Like how can you be fully in support of that? He's compromising his Islamic identity. At that point, then how do you say that you represent Muslims when you're not actually upholding some of the basic beliefs of Islam or basic values of Islam?
I mean, pragmatic, the means, the ends justifies the means thinking.
Yeah, but I don't think that's acceptable. Or like the other Hamza Yusuf in Scotland, the premier in Scotland, and he was interviewed and they really grilled him on this LGBT issue. And then they asked him, like, do you think that homosexuality is less than heterosexuality? And he said, no, I think I know what the book says. Like, I know what the Quran says, but I actually think homosexuality is no different than heterosexuality. So this is like disbelief. Like you are denying and rejecting God's word, like literally God's word. So that's a betrayal of Islam, and how we can't really support that.
And so I do both kinds of interfaith, but I like the more upfront and not liberal democratic party. If you like the rent a mob, it's kind of even promoted by, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of Jewish organizations that will promote these things, and they'll use fear mongering tactics against Muslim communities. But I mean, I opened up our debate in saying, well, I'm assuming as a Muslim, you want to treat people the way they want to be treated, and even if you believe that they have false beliefs, that understanding their belief, not even Judaism, people of the book, but if it's Hindus, Zoroastrians, atheists, Satanists, even if it was LGBT or something, you say, I definitely oppose this, think it's sinful, I would highly recommend against it. But within a certain realm, it's still worthwhile to hear a person out in order to, within reason, treat them how they want to be treated.
I don't agree with the golden rule, and there's a lot of philosophical critique of the golden rule, in the sense that, well, treat others how you want to be treated is a kind of a self-centered or egocentric understanding of morality. Because why is your sentiments or your preferences for treatment the bar or the standard for how you treat others? Rather, morality should be based off what God has commanded, God's commandments on how to treat people and how to be in the world. That takes priority, whether that's what I like or not. Because what if I'm, for example, a masochist? I take pleasure in being abused. So does that mean I can abuse others? Well, that's how I want to be treated. Of course not. So you have to have so the golden rule ultimately is the same problem with Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. And when you go in philosophy, maybe you've studied it and you study the categorical imperative.
I'm familiar.
It kind of boils down to the golden rule. To make a long story short, like the categorical imperative comes to, how you treat others, or the kind of moral value or moral principle that you accept is something that you can apply universally. But it ends up being a kind of empty statement. Like just saying, oh, treat everyone the way that you want to be treated, is like saying treat everyone well. Okay, well, what does treating people well actually mean? Like, what is the substance of that? And that's given by divine guidance, and that's given by, sacred law, as opposed to people's subjectivities, which you reach a stage like, and this is a kind of a cascading effect or a domino effect, where people will just reinforce each other's vices, and they'll say that, well, I'm not going to speak out against these people committing a vice because I myself want to commit that vice, or I enjoy, this kind of lascivious, immoral, degenerate lifestyle. Therefore, I'm not going to speak out against others who are committing it because that's, what I enjoy myself. That creates this feedback loop, or this kind of vicious cycle that can destroy society, destroy civilization, and that's when God's punishment comes. But you break that cycle by saying that, well, this is, God has said, do not cross this line. God has said and commanded and sent messengers, don't violate this, don't violate the sacred. And then we speak out, and we, even if we're not perfect, we're sinners, or we have our own problems, our own vices, but we still, for the respect and the sacredness of God's rule, we say that, okay, we don't accept this, we shouldn't be doing this, this is wrong. And then that in itself will break the cycle, and God saves those people, because they were willing. Even if God destroys the wicked, he will save those who they spoke out. And this is actually mentioned in the Quran regarding the people of the Sabbath, ashab as-sabt in Arabic. So in this part of the Quran, it mentions that there was, these groups of children of Israel, basically. And the children of Israel, God had commanded them to, keep the Sabbath. And that involved like not fishing. Don't fish on the Saturday. Like, don't go catch fish. It was like fishermen. That was the main income of that society. So there was a group that obeyed that commandment. And then there was another group that disobeyed that commandment. And the way that they disobeyed is that they laid nets on Friday. They set out their nets out so that they wouldn't be technically fishing, but the fish would come and land in the nets. So they're technically fishing, even though they're technically not. So then that one first group of people split into two. The one group of people said that, well, we have to tell them, stop, don't do this. You're disobeying God's command, and then we're going to all suffer and be punished for that. And then another group, who was also like abiding by the Sabbath, were saying that no, don't criticize them. Just mind your own business. They can do whatever they want. God will take care of them. But we, just mind our own business, and we don't need to create conflict. So then God punished those people as well as the Sabbath violators. So not only the Sabbath violators were punished, but also those who said stay silent and don't criticize. The only group that was saved out of those three were the ones who they kept the Sabbath, and they criticized, and they denounced or spoke out and said, you're doing wrong, to the Sabbath violators. So this is and this is like a principle within Islam, is that you have to, and this is a statement of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that if you see something wrong, you see some kind of injustice, then you speak out against, or you stop it with your hand. You stop it with your hand. If you're not able to stop it with your hand, like in a direct physical way, you stop it with your tongue, meaning you speak out against it. And if you're not able to do that, then you hate it in your heart. And that's like the lowest level of iman, or belief. So this is how Islam understands accountability and speaking out against injustice. It comes from the Quran and Hadith.
Well, I mean, it's theoretical, just like Jews. If you're a minority, you live according to the law of the land. And I don't know if you ever ran a business, but I mean, presumably people in your audience are, you're subject to fair employment and different things. So if you're looking like days off of work or dietary concerns, like right now it's Ramadan, and someone's like, "Oh, I'm fasting day, or can I have the day off, or can I have a little bit of leniency related to this?" And so if you're a Muslim in the U.S. and an employer, you're bound by law, even if it's like LGBT stuff like that. You can't, that's a condition of citizenship. But even if it was something you disapprove, like a day off, where it's okay, you have a Hindu employee and they want to celebrate their holiday, like, can I have the day off for dietary restrictions? And even if it was like something you considered forbidden, like, can I have the day off to go to my friend's gay wedding or something like that? Um, that is a question of tolerance versus principle, and there's a question of living in a diverse society, and versus theoretically what it would be like in an Islamic society, what the law preferably would be, versus your obligation to live according to the law of the land you're in.
Yeah, so definitely we live by the law of the land, but we can also understand like what is really ideal, and there are laws that are contrary to God's will or God's commands, and there are laws that are in line with God's commands. So in the United States or even in Israel, like Israel, gay marriage is illegal. Gay marriage is not allowed in Israel. And in the U.S. also, for most of the history of the United States, it was not legal, and it was even punishable.
I
You
mean,
know,
currently it is, and if you're an employer, it's illegal to discriminate against an employee based on their sexual orientation. So
yeah,
that's
yeah. So the law
currently the
has
law of the
changed.
land,
So
and I assume
but
there's
is
a lot
that
of
correct?
people
Is
listening that are Muslims that run businesses, and they might have gay employers, or if they're in a case, if the case, and I don't know if I mean, I don't know if you're actually an Islamic authority or people come to you with rulings, but if you were a local imam or judge and someone said, I have a business and, this gay person applied and I don't want to have my business shut down, like, should I hire them?
Yeah, I mean that's you have to abide by the law, but the law for the law to force you to hire people who they are basically violating your moral standards,
Or even say, let's
then
say they
that's
don't do anything to affect your business. Say, I completely disapprove of this behavior, but you didn't do anything wrong with the business. So I don't, what you do when you go home, like, I'm not your authority. Although if you ask me, I disapprove of it, but you didn't ask me, so I'm not going to I'm not going to impose it on you. And if it
I
was,
mean that's a very liberal, like when I say liberal, I mean like philosophically liberal conception of law and discrimination. But
I
like there
mentioned,
should
Imam Kazemi at the Mosque of America. I heard him speak at University of Michigan. I used to go to the Juma service or some Muslim events, and he mentioned, to mostly a Muslim audience of serious problem in Dearborn of people own liquor stores because that's a common
Mhm.
business of Arab immigrants into America is to open up liquor stores, and he's got a huge mosque, and he mentioned, like, he's got he told some weird story about his a big donor, successful businessman who has a liquor store, whose daughter like wanted to be a cat therapist, and he's sitting there trying to listen to him. It's like, well, a cat therapist is kind of like, that's a little bit weird, but like, no, like, you with the liquor store, that's worse than being a cat therapist. But how you're going to navigate that, because like, if you have a big mosque in a metro area, just the nature of immigration, like, probably a lot of uh, your members are, and I've had more fundamental Muslim people. It's like, no, you mess up, you're out. And but a lot of most of the Muslims I met here are at least that are sending their kids to college and have business people have to take a liberal approach. That like, I mean, I don't know the ruling in your area. You're saying you disapprove that you can't have a mosque and have a bunch of people that own liquor stores, even though that's one of the most common professions for Arabs in Metro Detroit.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. Those I hope they go bankrupt. I hope they would go bankrupt, and that they're not only violating God's commands, which is bad enough, but they're also preying on the community by feeding into people's addictions and financially exploiting people who are, you know, getting drunk, or they have a substance addiction, dependence. So it's completely wrong and despicable. I don't, if the Muslims who are doing that, I condemn them outright. I think it's completely unacceptable. And imams should be condemning, and they do. Imams condemn them as well. Like, why are you opening a liquor store? Like, this is, that it's forbidden to sell alcohol. So you think that you can be in good standing with the Muslim community. And then, there are examples of liquor store owners. They try to butter up the mosque, their local mosque, and they'll give big donations, and they'll say, "Oh, here's a big contribution to the mosque, but you're a liquor store owner." And then the mosque says, "No, actually, we don't we don't need that money. This is not clean money." So that's. But I mean,
well, what does it mean to condemn them? I mean, so you're gonna kick them out of the mosque, you're gonna shun them, you're gonna mistreat them in public, or you just be like, I don't really approve of that person's behavior, but if you meet the person you might respect, you might let your kids be friends with their kids, or you tell your kids like you can't be friends with that guy's kids.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you would do anything to harm them. You can't physically attack them. You can't say anything to ruin their reputation, other than saying that, well, they're doing something wrong, absolutely wrong and condemnable. Their children, okay, that their children are not responsible for the sins of their father, but it's something that the community should shun and condemn. Like, this is wrong. Shaming a person is very important. Like, you shame them in the sense that, well, this is something, why are you doing it? This is a shame. Like, God is not going to bless your household. God is not going to bless your children. Your money is coming from something that's haram. That's what shaming is. It doesn't mean like going and harming the person or calling them ugly names, like slanderous names.
Is it a permanent condition, though, being a minority in the West or a multicultural environment? They say like, no, this is going to be the permanent condition of the West. I mean, theoretically, you might hope that society will change, or you might have your views about God judging the world and sin not standing long, just like you're saying, okay, like Israel, Palestine, or something. Like you say that, well, you can't get away with that because God runs the world, versus actively getting involved. But that issue, this is a permanent condition of living in the West.
What is selling alcohol?
Well, the tolerance of sinful behavior, and like saying, I'm assuming like,
oh yeah.
Like,
I mean, you have
or Abdul Said that you say
you
think he viciously like, I want to get head, or I mean, you thought it out and say like, no, this is just the reality of living in the West, and took a more tolerant attitude.
No, that's the reality of living in the world, anywhere in the world. If you even live in Mecca, you live in Mecca or Medina, you're going to see things that are immoral, and people are going to violate God's law. That's just part of being the human condition. So there is a level of tolerance, but the hadith that I mentioned is explicitly addressing this, that if you have the means to change something and implement justice and implement correction in the eyes of God, if you have the means and the ability, meaning you have the authority to do that, then you do so. And if you don't have the authority, like to physically change it and to make things right, then you speak out against it. And if you don't have, sometimes you don't even have the authority or the means to say anything, to speak out against the problem, then hate it in your heart. So, but if you do have the authority, like you mentioned corruption of leaders, if you had the authority to stop that corruption, you wouldn't say, oh, well, I'm going to tolerate that corruption because let people do whatever they want. The legal system doesn't even have that. Any legal system assumes that you're going to stop injustice by executive power, and executive power is coercion. You force people. Okay, you have to obey the law. There's no choice about it. There's no, you live your life and I live mine. The law is the law. We have that kind of attitude when it comes to secular law, but in past societies, in religious societies, where it's a religious society, a religious land, and there's a law that's guided by the religion, then it's God's principles that are enforced. And that doesn't mean like in Islam, like an Islamic State, every part of Islam is forced. Like the police are going to break down your door if they find out you missed a prayer. They wouldn't have that kind of surveillance power in the first place. Or like if like you're in a Muslim society, but people are eating during Ramadan behind closed doors. Okay, well, the government should not be the Muslim government should not be breaking down people's doors and making sure is everyone fasting? Is everyone uh, abiding by Ramadan? No, that's not the ideal. The ideal is that, well, in public spaces and according to like the public values of society, you have to maintain God's order. But if you are in private and no one can tell, then there's no spying apparatus to make you abide by the law. So that's the kind of balance that we see in Islam. I think that's true for any kind of theocratic society historically. Um, if you go to Africa or Southeast Asia or South America, you have many societies where prior to the Enlightenment, prior to modernism, what were their laws based on? It was based on scripture. It was based on certain religious philosophies or a certain heritage, and those were enforced. It wasn't about like, oh, well, let's all respect each other's beliefs no matter what, or let's all respect each other's lifestyle no matter what. No, you have to abide by the law, and there can be tolerance for a diversity, but it's a tolerance that's defined by that overarching system. And even in the secular world today, that's not absolute tolerance. There are many things that are not tolerated, even though they don't harm other people.
Yeah, like racism or questioning
Well,
protected minorities. Like, I mean, relatively, for whatever reason, society has at least attempted to make that beyond the pale. I mean, it's not yet. I mean, it may even maybe attempts to make it illegal or bound to censorship or at least shunning or public protest, even if something relatively you could argue isn't even wrong or is even commendable to call out injustice or
I had a heated back and forth with this comedian named Owen Benjamin.
I
And
watched that,
yeah, I think that racist statements are like things that are said against blacks or Asians or Jews on a racial basis, that those can actually do harm. Should they be like illegal? Should there be like a complete ban? Maybe not. Like maybe that's too much executive overreach. But should they be shunned? Should it be seen as like wrong to spew like racial epithets or anti whatever language? I think that should be shunned in society because it's clearly painful for people.
It's a sign of poor character. But like I was saying, okay, I worked in construction. Like, so if you're talking like a higher level of behavior versus if you have a construction crew, you may not get that far policing that type of behavior in your construction crew.
Yeah, that's true. They're not known to be the most racially sensitive demographic, the construction workers, along with the sailors, and might hear some offensive things in those circles. Okay, well, again, it was a pleasure speaking with you, David. And any other comments that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I saw you had a Stark comment just saying how I see this Gaza conflict ending. And
yeah, I don't know if you want to address all of these because we're getting close to 2 hours, so I didn't want to take up too much of your time.
okay, yeah, just unfortunately, I think that Israel's going to attempt an ethnic cleansing. And just looking at the statistics and being an outlier in the Jewish community and having extremely little success, even like democratic liberal organizations largely backing it. And so if you're someone trying to stop it and powerless, that it's depressing. Like the activism, so there are all protests all over the place, elections. I mean, short term, there's not much to do about the suffering of the Palestinian people. The U.S. just gave like 2,000 more bombs, but I think the pressure is at least escalating, at least preventing a larger regional war. in terms of the APAC agenda exposed of trying to go to war with Iran, and so one of the reasons I'm coming out to speak to you and stepping up, because I would like to see this disaster averted. And unfortunately, the polling statistics, the statements from Israel makes it very clear that they would like to do an ethnic cleansing. So you just pray that that gets resolved and doesn't escalate. And I appreciate you having me on this conversation. Like I said, like if you're pro-Jewish, a lot of Jews reached out to me. He's like, "How'd you let him get away with that?" And I was like, "Well," or like, he lied about Judaism. I said, like, no, those are all legitimate questions. And if you're a God-fearing or lover of Judaism, the questions worthy of thought and answers. And so I appreciate you even attacking Judaism, like relatively, make me a better Jew, make me think about things, self-examine myself, and having this conversation. And I'd say, I don't know that much about you, but so the ADL, God forbid, like that's why I'm saying, like I think they're going to try to carry out an ethnic cleansing. I think that's why people like the ADL are going after people like you to try to sweep it under the rug. I think it's going to fail, but it could be disastrous. And just pray that people make better decisions and treat each other better.
Do you have any practical advice for anyone, Muslim, non-Muslim, Jewish, non-Jewish, to fight against the ethnic cleansing, and to, is there any kind of particular line or approach or strategy that's going to maybe break through with these kinds of groups like the ADL or APAC or whoever?
I think you just have to be better than them. So you have to bring attention to it, care about the Palestinian suffering, without saying that if you like, God, I was mentioning, God forbid, your apostate prophet, hater, who was looking at the ADL hit piece on you, and it's like, hey, that's not good. Like they should have let him write that. That just wasn't that powerful. And saying like, well, do they actually have anything on you? Like, is that all they got? They look through all your stuff. They use all their money to look through everything bad they could find about you. And, these comments is the worst they could have about you. And even if you made, you didn't, relatively. Being just, upright people that can't reasonably be called out as terrorist or violent, and say like, no, like it's us, it's the U.S., it's Israel that's doing these atrocities. And it's just Islamophobia, anti-Arab hatred, this concept, they're barbarians, they deserve it, they're doing it to themselves. So call attention to it and have upstanding behavior, where it's just clear that like there's no way that these people deserve this treatment, because the bad behavior you will just like I said, the hit piece on you, do they really have anything on you besides a handful of statements you made over the last year that relatively didn't even look that bad?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to find where's the anti-Semitism, like where did I express any kind of racial hatred for the Jewish people, and I've been very clear that that kind of anti-Jewish sentiment is completely wrong, and I've said that to my audience even, and you noted like, okay, Daniel is focusing on Judaism only because of the situation in Gaza, but in prior to this, I've defended Jews against white nationalists. I've defended Jews against other groups that do have this kind of incorrect perspective that, okay, there are corrupt Jews, therefore all Jews are just, we paint them with one brush and we say that we hate Jews. So this is something that I consider offensive and wrong. And I was actually taken aback that you said that you're, abused with anti-Semitic statements, or people have called you names in the past. I think that makes me sad to hear. But yeah, so I was looking for the anti-Semitism, and the only thing that they said was anti-Semitism really was taking quotes from Jewish scripture out of context, which is debatable if I did that or not. I think you said that not really, even though you have a different interpretation of those passages, but it's a legitimate question. And then they
I
said
was
like, oh,
unprepared. And say if a Jewish scholar wants to come and step up to your, like I did my best on the spot, not knowing what you were going to say, but you've done it. So you put out so if some Jewish scholar, some people reached out to me, and I said, like James said, like relatively, like I was the only one who said yes and stepped up, and I did my
yeah,
best because I love Judaism, and wanted to make a point of calling out my own corrupt leaders, and stepping up as an individual. But certainly any Jew watching this that has answers to your question, I encourage them to put them forward.
yeah,
And I
sure.
say they might not, because really like most Israeli professors are saying the same thing.
Yeah, that's like I try to be fair. Like I try to be fair in my criticism of any religion, whether it's Judaism, Hinduism, Christianity, because we have to be charitable. Even when we're critical, we still have to be charitable and not take things out of context and not like outright lie. That's what has been done to Islam, and it's very frustrating and aggravating when people will misquote or they'll deliberately misconstrue. So I don't want to do that to other people when I think there's enough to critique of other religions without having to be dishonest. So I try to only bring up legitimate criticisms. Like there are certain things that are in the um, like for example in the Talmud, there seems to be some allowance for pederasty in the Talmud. Like there's not a very clear prohibition of pederasty. But Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah, he very clearly says that this is unacceptable and there could even be a punishment associated with pederasty. So it's not fair for me to claim that, oh, Judaism is a pro pederasty religion. That would be a completely unfair thing to say because you have the greatest legal scholar of Judaism with Maimonides prohibiting it. So then it's not fair to characterize the whole religion when one of the biggest authorities in the religion has that kind of position.
God forbid I did look that up on the web. Like I didn't go to Harvard. Like I was a good student, but like I had to look up what pederasty even meant.
Oh yeah, pederasty. Yeah, it's like abuse of young boys. So
Okay,
yeah,
well, I
that's some.
appreciate you allowing me to speak and share, and as I said, these conversations are extremely important. And say what could do about the war. Conversations like these, and the biggest cure to hatred is actually knowing the people. The biggest reason why Israel and Gaza, it is the apartheid system. It is the fact that most Israelis don't know Palestinians, and like that my unpopular, extremely unpopular view, that like eventually we're going to have to give them full citizenship, and God forbid the war could turn disastrous for Israel. Without being like a military analysis, and say that voluntarily, I was around in 2006 when they built the wall, and I was like, that's a horrible decision, but I didn't have any power, like besides to say that to a few people, and but saying that they're going to have to give all the Gazans, all the Palestinians, full Israeli citizenship. But the way to achieve that is conversations.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and I really enjoyed speaking with you. And one question that did come up that might be interesting to answer, like people said that asked, there were some comments that, well, what is the thing that you, Daniel, as a Muslim, admire most about Jews? And maybe I can give a few things. Um, the belief in God is obviously very important. I think that with Jews specifically, the that kind of loyalty to each other is actually something that is a virtue. I think it's a big virtue when you have that kind of loyalty to people of your own community, and Muslims, I think, need a lot of that. With the Jewish community, I think with some within the Jewish community, they take it too far. Like they take it too far, and it's like, okay, we're not going to criticize each other, even when it's something criminal like corruption and killing of Palestinians, and we're not going to say anything, even though we know that that's wrong. But having loyalty, I think, to your own, that's a really good quality. Even in that conversation that you had with Joseph Cohen, he clearly disagreed with you, had big problems with you, but the conversation remained really civil. And I think that speaks to your recognition that, okay, we're part of the same community. Let's like talk in a respectful way, and you can agree to disagree. So that's one thing. Another thing that I appreciate about the Jewish community is the sense of humor. I think that there's a good sense of humor, and I appreciate it. But again, it can be taken too far. So, sense of humor where denigrating or blaspheming against God, I think that goes too far. Making light of God, making light of religion, that some Jews engage in, but other Jews disapprove of. But the sense of humor also, I think, is very it's a very positive aspect of the Jewish community.
I see this woman Claire call in the chat, and like I have a small following, and she's constantly in my chat. I've been speaking to her for years, and there's no way you would agree with her secular Quranism, but maybe elements of it. She's a prolific streamer, intelligent woman in London, who I've been arguing with for years. But I see her in the chat, wanting me to shout her out.
Okay. Yeah, she's emailed me in the past too. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, David. Again, I hope you have a great night, and we will be in touch. Maybe we can have other conversations in the future. But as a pleasure as always.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.